Good morning.
Morning.
Please feel free, in the summertime we keep the windows open and makes it breezy, but also the kids, it's good for them to play in the yard. So if it gets noisy partway through, it's a little hard to hear, feel free to close the window. So with the fans on, it stays pretty cool. And I'll try to talk robustly. Isn't it nice when it gets hot?
Yeah.
You have to get into the heat, to get out of the heat. That's how I feel. I was on a trip the past couple weeks with my wife and soulmate, Azusa. We went to Baja, Mexico for 10 days. And we had planned this trip for last year, and we were going to go last August, and then we weren't able to go. My mother was in the hospital for most of August, and we rearranged the trip, and we were able to go this past week. So if I look a little tan and maybe overly relaxed, you will know that I have been communing with the ocean, which we'll talk a little bit about this morning. I'd like to talk about a legend that comes from the Lotus Sutra about a girl. Her name in Japanese is Ryujo. In the Sanskrit is Naga Kanya. You'll notice that term Naga, which comes up a lot in our teachings. Naga means dragon or serpent. And these beings, these dragons, these serpents, live in deep waters or deep in the earth. In almost every culture, I think you can find them. But certainly in Asian cultures, South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, these beings are really throughout the spiritual landscape. And so as I talk about this legend of the dragon girl, I want to invite you to loosen up your literal mind and not to think of these kind of legends in terms of what is in some empirical sense, but to think more about what is actual. People will ask the question, if you tell a story, like, well, did it actually happen? And the answer to that question when it comes to sutras, like the Lotus Sutra, is yes, it actually is happening always, right? But the actual is not something that is out there that we try to make real through a kind of objective perspective, but we hear the legends, and the more we hear them, the more that those legends enter into the water of our own heart, the deep oceans of our own being, and then this very important thing happens. The world comes alive, not simply as a place of objects, a place of things which I move around in, but a place that's alive with meaning, with significance. And the legends provide us a way to touch that significance, to see with our own eyes how significant the living world is. I don't mean living just like trees are living versus a rock which isn't living. I'm not talking about sentience in a conventional way. I'm talking about a whole universe which is deeply imbued with heart. And that's what the Buddha Dharma is inviting us into. Not just a kind of quiet mind, right, which would be peaceful in a kind of isolated sense, but a mind that's quiet enough that it can see directly the aliveness of everything and can receive and give that kind of aliveness. So the dragon girl is a great teacher here, and she comes up again and again in references. So you might hear like a Dogen, for example, in one of his famous writings, he will say, even a girl of 8, that's how old she is, 8 years old. Even a girl of 8 years old is a great teacher to the boundless assembly. Because in this legend, the dragon girl becomes this teacher for the whole assembly, which is very surprising to everyone, right? Because in a very patriarchal society, first of all, to be a girl, and then to be 8. And so how could this person be a teacher, right, to the assembly? But in these legends, actually, that's what happens. There is, I'll just put a little pin in there. If you are fortunate enough to have been an 8-year-old girl or to know any 8-year-old girls, please listen to them deeply. Like, these beings are like unbelievable jewels. And I'll just leave it at that. You can forget my talk, go listen to, ask some questions of an 8-year-old girl. So I'll also say that Yujo, Nagakanya, she's another place that she shows up. And this is good things for us to learn if we're following Buddhist teachings in these legends. Where do these beings show up? Another place that she shows up a lot in Chinese Buddhism is she's one of the acolytes of Avalokitesvara, Avalokitesvara being the bodhisattva of compassion. And so in a Chinese context, if you see a statue of Avalokitesvara or a painting of Avalokitesvara, if you look closely, you'll almost always see there on the Avalokitesvara's left-hand side, you see the image of Yujo, or the dragon girl. And then on her right side is Sudana. Avalokitesvara's right side is Sudana, who is the great hero of the Huayin, or the flower ornament scripture, which our Dharma sister taught about during the practice period in the fall so much. You remember Sudana goes and visits these 52 different teachers on his quest for awakening. So Avalokitesvara there has these two acolytes, or you could say two aspects of Avalokitesvara's heart. That's another way to talk about it. And Yujo is the representative of wisdom, representative of this deep penetrating vision. So in this story, the Lotus Sutra, I was on a trip through the Midwest a few weeks ago, giving some talks and meeting with different communities there. And I think I said this in my last talk, I was trying to figure out a way to be challenging without being a jerk. I don't want to go and like sort of be like, what are you guys doing? Like, I'll try to rattle people, but I kind of want to rattle people. That's sort of like a part of my karmic, whatever, for better or for worse. I hope it's good for you sometimes. So I was trying to figure out what should I do? And I thought, I'll read from the Lotus Sutra. Because in Western Buddhism, Lotus Sutra has been a little difficult for us because we're very rationalistic, and many of us came from religious backgrounds where the kind of religious teaching became problematic in some way. So the more kind of God talk, so to speak, freaks a lot of us out, right? And we have a Western Zen which sort of said, no, it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, it's a way of life, it's a meditation technique, and we kind of leave that stuff. But as people's practice is deepening and as the tradition is deepening in the West, the Lotus Sutra is just coming up out of the ocean. It's inevitable. And so all these places, I thought I was being a little radical, giving him this image from the Lotus Sutra. And by the end, they're like, we just finished a study period on the Lotus Sutra. And I'm totally blown away by the Lotus Sutra. So I'm so happy. I didn't have to be a jerk or rattle anybody at all. I just got to resonate with their Lotus Sutra enthusiasm. Not everybody was enthusiastic about it, but they'll come around. So in the Lotus Sutra, different than many of the sutras that have been really kind of prized in the West, like the Prajnaparamita sutras, the Lotus Sutra is very visionary. So it's legends with all kinds of rich imagery, right? And all of these things that happen layer upon layer upon layer. And so as you pay attention to the stories, you read them again and again, different aspects unfold themselves. But this part of the Lotus Sutra, the 12th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, happens at this interesting time. So Shakyamuni Buddha is there on what usually is referred to as Vulture Peak. In this translation, which I quite like, people interested in reading the Lotus Sutra, I think he translates it as Eagle Peak. And that's a place on a mountain that you can go visit in India now. And there's this kind of shelf in the side of the mountain. My teacher said when he went there, he was thinking mountain, and then he kind of thought more like Craggly Hill. When he got there, you mountain, right? It's kind of a mountain, and there's the shelf on it, and it's said that that's where the Buddha would teach, and certainly the Lotus Sutra, that's where he's teaching the Lotus Sutra. So in this scene, what happens is the Buddha has taken the Buddha's seat on Vulture Peak to give a teaching, and in the earlier chapters, as he prepares to teach the Lotus Sutra, there's this great stupa. The whole earth shakes, and this great stupa, which is like a repository for relics, like a dead Buddhas, right? Comes up out of the earth, and it's unimaginably big. It's like way bigger than the whole planet of the U.S., right? And it hangs up in the air, or whole planet of Earth, and it hangs up in the air. And this stupa holds a Tathagata from this land that's unfathomably far away. A Tathagata is like the word for Buddha, unfathomably far away in the east, like uncountable bajillions of cosmoses to the east, is where this Buddha, abundant treasure, lived and taught. And so this is the stupa of abundant treasure. And it's said that abundant treasure made a vow to appear wherever the Lotus Sutra is going to be taught. And so this stupa is there hanging up in the sky. And the deal is to open the stupa. Any Buddha who's going to teach the Lotus Sutra can open the stupa, but the only way they can open the stupa is to call together all the beings of their cosmos. Right? All of the beings of their cosmos have to be present for the stupa to open. This is very interesting. And so the Buddha calls together all of the bodhisattvas and Buddhas that have all throughout the cosmos and all of their followers and indeed all beings. And in this scene, he rises up and the door opens and everyone's expecting there to be like, dead Buddha, right? Not dead Buddha. There's no such thing as dead Buddha. And there is abundant treasure Buddha. And abundant treasure Buddha scoots over and gives Shakyamuni Buddha half his seat. And the two Buddhas sit there in that stupa. And this is the scene from which the continual Lotus Sutra begins to unfold. It's at that time that Shakyamuni Buddha tells a story. He tells a story about how Devadatta, who is kind of the embodiment of mischief and even evil, like he's the bad guy, right? He tells a story about how Devadatta and he were close, are very close spiritual friends from many, many, many lifetimes, and that Devadatta will become a Buddha. This is radical stuff. Right? He doesn't cast him down into the lake of fire forever to be the spoiler of humanity. He says Devadatta will also be a Buddha. You guys just can't see it. I can see it because I'm a Buddha. Paraphrasing Shakyamuni. But you can't see it. You think of him as bad, and of course he is bad. He's doing bad things. He's kind of messing up people's lives. But he will become a Buddha too. And at that point, one of the attendants of this Buddha that's come from far, far away comes. Maybe we should go home now, right? And his name is Accumulated Wisdom Bodhisattva. He says, maybe it's time to go home. And the Buddha says, wait a moment. There's something that you should learn. There's someone you should talk to before you go. You should speak with Manjushri, who is the Bodhisattva of wisdom of this cosmos. And Abundant Treasure says, Accumulated Treasure Bodhisattva says, I see. And at that point, from the ocean, Manjushri Bodhisattva, who's the Bodhisattva of wisdom, who's here is in this icon that we sit around when we're sitting meditation. This is one of the forms of Manjushri. Comes up out of the ocean from the serpent kingdom that's there deep in the ocean. Just think about that for a second. Deep, deep in the ocean, the serpent kingdom. My wife was watching Aquaman on the plane, that was little TVs in the back. She was watching Aquaman. I was looking out and I would look in every once in a while. I'd see Aquaman. I was thinking, Serpent King, at the bottom of the ocean. So Manjushri was down there. Manjushri emerges and has this conversation with Accumulated Wisdom Bodhisattva. Accumulated Wisdom Bodhisattva asks Manjushri, says, how is your teaching deep in the ocean? How is your teaching in the unfathomable depths of heart and mind? Manjushri says, uncountable people came to the way. Uncountable beings came to the way. And as he said that, uncountable bodhisattvas emerged from the ocean. They just start pouring out of the ocean and they join this massive assembly. If you can remember what I was saying of the stupa in the sky, this whole situation, all these bodhisattvas, just bodhisattvas upon bodhisattvas, and they cover everything. And then he asks a very interesting question. The Accumulated Wisdom Bodhisattva does. He says, is it possible for someone to attain awakening very quickly? And Manjushri says, yes, of course. There is a person. Her name is Gyujo. Her name is Dragon Girl. She's known as that because she is the daughter of the king of this land at the bottom of the ocean. And at first, accumulated treasure Bodhisattva, he doubts this. He says, but don't beings have to toil for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime in their pursuit of the way to become awakened? Isn't that the example that we have of our great teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, who's told us of countless lifetimes of great striving before finally coming into this world and ready to become a Buddha? And just as abundant treasures or accumulated treasures is saying that, here she comes, right out of the ocean. When I was sitting by the ocean in Baja, I kept seeing her just coming out of the ocean. There's something about the ocean, you know, especially where we were. There's different kinds of ocean, different ways you see it, which we'll talk a little bit about later, maybe next week. I don't know how long I'll go on about this, but sometimes you're by the ocean, and where we were, there was a long beach, white sand beach, and we had a little place right on the sand, so you could just go out and sit, and the ocean just, even it's windy, you know, you're like, oh, it's very choppy now, but still, the wholeness of the ocean is just like this horizon. You know, when it's broad enough, you can kind of see the curvature of the earth. And so there she comes out of the ocean. And she greets the Buddha, and she steps to one side, which is the typical way in an assembly like that. And here comes Shariputra. Shariputra, who's a representative of the old school. Shariputra says, no way. There's no way that this girl has attained the way. Well, first of all, she's a girl. You know, and it has some nice, not so nice things to say about the bodies of women, which is common within Buddhist literature. I want to make any, I don't want to obscure that in any way. But here in the Lotus Sutra, it's important that Shariputra articulates that. He articulates the hardened vision of the people of his time, of the people who were the representative of the Buddha's assembly in a conventional sense. Their hearts had become hardened. The aliveness of the world somehow was not penetrating his vision. And he says, not only that, but it takes countless eons to become awakened. And he recounts the same kind of thing, this question that accumulated treasures Bodhisattva had brought up. It takes all of this work. You know, Shariputra knew what the way was. He knew what the path was. He could see it. It was clear. It was a thing. It was dead. And just as he says this, the dragon girl removes a jewel from her robes, and she hands it to the Buddha. This is one of my favorite images in all sutras. She just hands the Buddha. And the sutra says very plainly, the Buddha received it immediately. To let that sink into you a little bit. She brings this jewel. She gives it to the Buddha. He receives it immediately. Now, jewels are very important things, living things within the spiritual cosmology of Asia in general. Any Dragon Ball fans? Few people. So the dragon, the naga, the serpent, they have these balls that the Son Goku, the hero, is trying to go around and collect. Those of you who don't know the story, it's fine. It's based on the ancient legend of Monkey, which is a Chinese legend. But these jewels have great power. But they have great power because they are the reflection of everything. Like, this dragon girl can have this jewel because she is the ocean. She knows the unfathomable depths of the ocean. She knows the breadth. She knows the inability to nail anything down. She knows about the continual undulation. She knows about the transparency. She knows about the cloudiness. She knows about all of the ways that the ocean is. And that's what's called a jewel. It's her heart. It's her mind. And she gives it to the Buddha and he accepts it immediately. I love that line in the sutra because there's all this flowery language, right? It's all this, you would expect it to be, and the Buddha in his blah, 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 and flowers fell and all of this, and then he accepted it. No, it's none of that. Just the Buddha accepts it immediately. Boom. And then she asks a very interesting question to Shariputra. She says, Shariputra, I just gave a jewel to the Buddha. How long did that take? And Shariputra says, it was immediate. And she said, even faster than that. Boom! She's a celestial goddess. She transforms into a great Buddha and teaches all of the worlds in all of the directions. She becomes a great teacher to the assembly. What is our vision of awakening? You know, Shariputra, oftentimes, we need a Shariputra. Oftentimes we think if we could just get rid of Shariputra, everything would be okay. Actually, it's not the case. Shariputra has an important role to play. Shariputra says, this is the way we do things. This is how it's been done. This has been proven to be effective. This is how we practice. He's grounded. He takes care of the community. He's a representative of something. But Shariputra also has a tendency to not allow aliveness to be fully present. The objectified becomes the kind of transfixing of delusion. The way we see gets hardened. And so the Lotus Sutra shakes this up for our benefit. It says, Devadatta. You guys thought Devadatta was out of the scene? Nope. Devadatta's going to be your teacher one day. Deal with it. Right? And here, we're so sure that if I could just pull everything together, if I could just do things right, if I could just, work at it, and do what it is that I know needs to be done, I would be able to achieve Buddhahood. And here, Ryujo, at the age of 8, she shows up and she says, no, here's my heart. How long does it take to give your heart to the Buddha? It's immediate. And that's where the teaching springs from. Now, part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this today is because of the quality of summer. Now, we know it's different for everyone. Some people, summer is your time of intense work, and this is a time where you dial into something and you don't have a lot of room. Okay? I want to acknowledge that because for some people that's the case. For many people, summer is the time when things become a little diffuse. I know that's certainly my case. I've been working a lot, but I've been traveling a lot to work, and then I went on vacation, which was really great. Hope you get a chance. And there's something so important about that shift from getting things done, knowing what needs to happen, knowing what practice looks like, knowing what my spiritual path should be about, and if I was just kind of like strong enough, I would be doing that, to the place where the ocean is just broad. And there's a flicker of light that comes unexpectedly from every different kind of possibility that is there in the ocean. Again, the ocean of our own heart and mind is ungraspable. And it's full of all kinds of surprising creatures, including Manjushri and Ryujo. So I'd like you to think about, what is this jewel that Ryujo presents? This is a jewel that we all have, or we might say that we don't have it, it is us. And every one of us, that jewel has its own brilliance, its own illumination, its own luminosity. In one way, you could say it's the reason that you can hear the words I'm speaking now. It's the reason that you can see the assembly. You can feel the wind of the fan. All of those are the luminosity of that jewel. They're all founded in that direct consciousness that we all are totally imbued with. But we make this mistake of thinking that that consciousness is somehow kind of universal, meaning that if I just disappeared, then the consciousness would be there. This is not the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha's teaching is not if you could get rid of your individuality or your individual experience or your momentary encounter with all of the variety of life, if you could just let that go, then there would be luminosity. The Buddha's teaching is that the luminosity is all of that multiplicity. That the ocean is not just like a big blank, watery place, right? It's a place that's full of the surprises of all kinds of beings. I got to swim a little bit with an octopus. I'll stop bragging about that. I keep bragging about it here. It was really cool. Octopus, really cool. So how do we offer that heart? Even it's something we can't grasp. You think about that image of Ryujo offering her heart to the Buddha, offering this jewel of her deep heart, not just like her affection for the Buddha, but her consciousness, her life. You know, we think, well, I have to find the jewel to be able to do that. I have to locate it. I have to be able to grab it. But the teaching of the ocean is just the opposite of that. The teaching of the ocean is that the total breadth and ungraspability of the ocean is where the jewel arises from. The ungraspability of your consciousness, the ungraspability, the unfixedness of being able to carry out the plan is the very place that is calling you to a deeper willingness to meet what is. You see the difference there? If you could just know the whole ocean and then you knew it as a jewel and you could give that, it's just all your own, stuff. But here, Ryujo knows that it's the willingness of heart which allows the jewel to appear. And because she can give that to the Buddha, it's not mine. All generosity really is an awakening to the not mineness of whatever it is you have. Try giving someone $1. Just do it. Just give them $1. And don't give someone $1 who doesn't need it. Because if they need it, your whole plan's like, yes, if we all gave $1, then these people wouldn't be homeless. Which is good. We should support people who are in need. But I mean, just like give something away, like without the practicality. Right? And it's so fun. It's just like your heart goes, I thought it was mine. It's like a joke. And you give it away and it's just like, ha, ha, ha. And it's the actualizing of non-possession, our incapacity to possess, which is what generosity is. Right? And that's why you gain so much from the practice of giving and the practice of receiving, which in many ways is harder when you receive something from someone. Again, if it's something you really need, then you can rely on the sentiment of being so touched by them being able to see your need and help you, which is great. No shame on that. But when you receive something that you don't even, someone just giving you something, it's also, really? Now I could pretend like it's mine for a little while. It's wonderful. So this true offering which Ryujo makes is a deep teaching for us about a willingness to allow the mush, to allow the broad, to allow the unformulated, to allow the plan that is falling apart, to allow the entirety of the living world to be what we're willing to come forward with in this moment. Don't mean this as a kind of a criticism of planning or any of those kinds of things. It's all very important. But remember, the Shariputra mind, which is an important aspect, has a tendency to deaden things. So if you want a real vacation, if you want to really be enlivened, which is what a vacation should be about, then I would encourage you to find the ocean. Because in finding the ocean, the vividness of living emerges. And that's what the way has to offer us, or one of the things. Time for any questions or comments?
In my non-sleep last night, I found myself obsessing over the idea of how they got baby Jessica out of the well, because I spent so much of my own time worrying about kids. And I was like just obsessed with the engineering of how they did it, whether they should have put some straps, was it right that they tunneled the site? Anyway,
Was it something that happened like a couple of years
this is a
ago?
long time ago. This is like 90s.
And she fell, like she was like crawling, and there was the well that they had been dull, and it wasn't like a well like with bricks around it. It was like a little chute like that up by the house, and she
like 100, 200 feet down.
Yeah, I remember.
There's
Yeah.
this hole.
But they got her, right?
They got it. It ended well. But and I'm totally relating to your talk today about the Shariputra mind, because that is the mode I run in 99.9% of the time with kids and work. And I guess my question is a really dumb one of how do you invite that ocean in when you've got to get the big.
Yeah. So urgency is really important. And at the same time, I'd say usually the baby's not at the bottom of the well. And sometimes they are. And then we have to go into a very sharp mind. The very sharp mind might also include seeing that she might not make it. And eventually she won't make it. So that's part of what urgency obscures. We need urgency, but sometimes, not to put too fine of a point on it, but sometimes our daughters don't make it. And that's not okay. But it's also the ocean that we all live in. And it's part of what makes us alive. So that's the hard part, is reconciling that even with all of our urgency, there's many tragedies that cannot be avoided. What heart do we want to cultivate to meet tragedy as life affirming, as opposed to deadening? That's really where the work is. When we can have that work in our day-to-day by remembering that mostly we're not at the bottom of the well, and finding out what it is that can't be destroyed by tragedy. So this would be one thing as from father to father that I would, a little trick that I used to use would be, I'd be so busy making life work that I would forget about the magic that is just the way that people see the world. I'm not even going to confine it to young people, but when you have little kids, it's a little easier. And making sure not only that you make the space for them to be enacting that magic, your children, but that you take the time to see through the same eyes. So, sometimes I'll grab my grandson Kai, which is really cool being a grandparent, because you don't have to do a lot of the other stuff, and so you kind of like, okay, here, and you get to just enjoy the magic of the eyes. But it's very easy for me. I have a lot to do, so I'm like, okay, Kai, you're playing with that. So I can say, oh, he's having a good time. And I'm happy that he's having a good time. But then my attention immediately goes to something else that I need to have, rather than creating a space. So when I was a dad, I would do that especially. And sometimes it was only 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And I would say to myself, okay, this amount of time, we have to block it off by time, by the way, or until this next thing happens. And I'm only going to stay present with what she's seeing. I'm only going to stay present with what she's experiencing, what she's doing, how she's seeing. And when you stay there, you have access to a quality of seeing and being, which is part of who you are, very directly. And then it gets to be weaved together with the very thing that, the very being, which is calling the love forward in you in such a way that urgency becomes more acute. You know, like your kids, there's nothing that will bring you to the edge of your own worry about the world than like a kid. You're like, I have to take care of them. I have to protect them from all of this possible tragedy, you know? And so that's called forward because you love so much. But that love can carry you another step, which is to say, actually, the whole ocean is their jewel too. And they're living through that. And so I have to live through that too. And you find ways to come back to that. Another good way, and your children are a bit young for this now, but plan for their going away. Like send them places without you on purpose. Sleepovers, that's a good place to start. You know, people not doing that as much as they used to. There's a lot of boogeymen out there. As far as they can figure out, there's no more boogeymen than there have ever been. Right? And we have a lot more tools to protect against the boogeymen. We have a lot more consciousness about how to make sure that our children are safe, not because we're hoarding, you know, we're doing this on them, but because we've checked the things that we need to check before we send them to someone's house for sleepovers. So, you know, send them there. And then as they get older, send them away on trips. Send them as exchange students. This is a number one thing. And for any of you who are raising kids, highly recommend when they're like 15, 16, if they have the constitution for it, physical and kind of mental constitution, send them away, send them far away, send them to a place that baffles you. Right? There's nothing like what's required of your trust in the world to do such a thing. But what you will find is that people everywhere have this jewel, and it's unmistakable. Anyway, that's my rambling. Sorry.
Interesting.
Hi.
Something I heard in your response just then reminds me of the image of the Buddha receiving immediately the jewel, the dragon girl. And I'm imagining in our own hearts both that movement of offering and that movement of immediate reception of the innumerable jewels. I'm wondering if you can talk about that side of that.
The receiving?
Yeah.
So it's a very good point. We oftentimes think of ourselves only on the side of offering to the Buddha, but it's equally true that we are on the receiving side. So the Buddha of our own being is involved in all of this legend, for example. And so the receiving of that jewel is the receiving of the aliveness of the ocean. And we're receiving that every moment. Mostly, we don't treasure it in that way. Mostly, we call it a berry, which are very tasty, or a rock, or a gum wrapper, or whatever it is. But we forget that it's a jewel. And so the much of our practice, you know, like those of you who came today to learn about meditation, this is all about meditation. That's everything we're talking about today. It's about meditation. It's about what is the quality of mind and heart in which we receive, you know, that offering over and over again. I have this image that's eating a hole in my head, which I was going to say for next week, but I'm going to give it to you right now, and then we'll end there, and then I'm going to take this up a bit next week as well from this image. So, among the things I was doing during my vacation was reading a little bit of a text from a Christian saint named Nicholas of Cusa, who lived in the 1500s, and was really great to, you know, I had come across him because Carl Jung was fond of his writing and had done some writing that was related, kind of talking about some of the theology of Nicholas of Cusa. And I had been reading a book by a young yin about something, and she had quoted a number of pieces from Nicholas of Cusa. And if you're mystically inclined at all, I really, really encourage you to read mystics from around the world, because it will freak you out how, like, you can't believe the word choice. We're talking in Germany, like the 16th century in Germany. And then the word choice about the text that she was quoting from was called The Vision of God. And the things that he's talking about in terms of eyes and seeing and oceans. And I mean, it just was really blowing me away. So anyway, I got a copy of the book, Nicholas of Cusa, recommended. And so I decided I was going to read this section on the vision of God. And he does this very interesting thing right in the beginning. He's sending this essay that he writes. He's writing to a monastic community that's in another town. He's a bishop or maybe a cardinal at this point. So he's like very busy. He's taking care of everybody, right? But he's also this mystic. And he's sending this to this community to encourage them on their path of devotion and seeing more deeply about the aliveness of the universe, which is maybe Buddhist word for God. And so he has this tract he's going to give them, but he also sends them an icon. And so the first section in this, he says, brothers, please, before you read, I'm going to try to invite you into this world, but before you read all of this thing, I want you to do this thing. I want you to hang this icon up. And then he says, perhaps on the north wall. I just love it. He's like, perhaps you would hang it on the north wall. He doesn't say hang it on the north wall. He says, perhaps it would be the north wall. Hang the icon. And then I want you all to stand around it like in a circle. And I want you to look at this icon. And it's an icon that is drawn in such a way that, and this is very common of icons, that wherever you would stand, it looks as if the icon's looking right at you. And they can't find this icon. They don't know what it was. He doesn't specify what the icon is in the writing, and they've lost the icon, so they don't know what it is. But it's an icon of God. He says that. What that means, we're not exactly sure. But it looks at you. So he says, notice that no matter where you stand, if you're on the east or you're on the west, it will appear as if God is looking directly at you. And God is looking directly at you. But if you were to ask your brother who's on the other side, on the west side, if you're on the east side, is God looking directly at you? Your brother would say, yes, God is looking directly at me. And then he goes on, he says, furthermore, if one were you to stand on the east side and the other to stand on the west side, and you were to walk, and you would see that God was following you, but the person who's walking from east to west and the person who's walking from west to east would both insist that God was looking only and completely and totally at them. And that God's eyes were moving both from the west to the east and the east from the west at the same time. And so he asked them to go through this full exercise in relationship with the icon. And then he goes into his teaching about the kind of mystical practices that he's encouraging them to take up. Now, why am I bringing this up here, other than it just I thought was so cool, is because this is the ocean. It looks directly at you always. It's not like a big place that's just over there that's way bigger than you. It is a life in which whatever you encounter is looking you right in the eyes, and it never stops. And it does that for every single being. This is what the Lotus Sutra is trying to teach us. That the meaning, the significance, you don't have to think about it as being universal in the sense that it's like a big umbrella that covers everybody up. It's universal in the sense that that icon of God, that Lotus Sutra, that stupa in the sky, it sees you directly. And it does that for all kinds of beings, even Devadatta. And because Gyujo is a hero, we wouldn't say, like even for Gyujo. We would say, of course, Gyujo. Okay, I'll stop.